How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tzadi Test, Daf 99 of Masechta Ksubis. Friends, well, 99 is close to 100. That's cool. Well, yeah, we're talking about the situation when this widow is selling property for her ksuba. Interesting stuff. So let's jump in. We're going to start in Daf Tzadi Ches Amud Beis, about 6 or 7 lines from the bottom. Ta Shma. Coming here. Hoisu Ksubasa Mono. Ho 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 ho. Her ksube was valued at 100 zuz. 100 zuzes. Umacha shvei mana v'dinar b'mana. Michra bottle. Okay. So, wait, this was from our Mishnah, right? What does it say in Mishnah? Hoisu Ksubasa Mono. Umacha shvei mana v'dinar b'mana. Michra bottle. Afidu emeres achze dina liyorshin michra bottle. Oh, comes from our Mishnah. So her ksuba is worth, Babel Yod. Her ksuba is worth 100 zuzes, and she sells, however, 101 zuzes worth of. I think that's what it is, because a dinar is, one dinar of zahav is 25 dinars of kesef, but 1 dinar of kesef is, I think, the equivalent of 1 zuz. So I guess what it's saying, mon of a dinar is 101 zuzes. That's what I'm assuming, friends. That's what I'm assuming. Not only me, my father also assumes that also. Tashma oisa ksubasa mono. So ksube was worth 100 zuzes. Umacha shvei mono v'dinar b'mono. Michra bottle. So she sells, however, 101 dinars, zuzes, worth of property. So it's one zuz extra. Right? She takes property of the estate worth 101 zuzes and sells that. So she oversold. So michra bottle. So her sale is bottle, doesn't work. My lab. Dizovin shvei mana v'dinar b'mana v'dinar. So what we want to say is, how do you understand this selling of 101 zuzes thing? She sold 101 property. She sold property that was valued at 101 zuzes. How much did she sell it for? 101 zuzes. Umay b'mana. So what does it mean for 100 zuz? Mana shela, meaning in receiving her ksuba that is valued at 100 zuz, right? In order to receive her ksuba that's valued at 100 zuz, what she did was she sold property that was worth 101 zuzes for 101 zuzes, right? She sold it at its value. Umay afilu, and what does it mean in the Mishnah? Even, right? What does it say in the Mishnah? Afilu, what does it say in the Mishnah? Even if she says that she'll return the dinar to the estate, it's still batal. So it means even if she says meaning even if she says, look, I understand that I sold 101 zuzes, so let me buy back with that extra zuz that I earned, let me buy back 1 zuz worth of property, and then we'll be even. Vikatani michra batal. And we're still saying that it doesn't work. So you have this widow. Her ksuba is worth 100 zuz. She sold property worth 101 zuz. That's too much. She's only entitled to 100 zuz of the estate. She sold 101 zuzes of the estate. So the Mishnah is saying, even if she says, okay, fine, I'll buy back a zuz worth of property from the fellow, and net, right? And the net amount sold will be 100 zuz, and that'll be my ksuba. No, it doesn't work. Rafuna Breder of Nosen lo b'da ozil. So Rafuna Breder of Nosen says, no, it's not exactly the situation. The reason why it's bottle is because between now and the time that the property was sold, the property decreased in value, which became cheaper, which means that this property, right? She sold 101 manas worth of property. This property is no longer worth that zuz anymore, right? She sold 101 zuz's worth of property. That one zuz of property is has gone down in value, which means that it's no longer 101 zuz anymore. So she sold 101 zuz, but then it went down in value, and she's basically gonna lose. Right? She's gonna basically lose money now. So the 100 zuz worth of property that she sold is now actually only worth 100 zuz. So therefore, she lost her opportunity to be able to buy it back. I'm sorry, I made a mistake. No, what it means is that she sold 101 zuz worth of property for 100 zuz, and therefore she under-received for it, and she sold too much, and that is why it does not work. Hami the sefer b'da ozil have reisha b'delo ozil. But one second, since the last part of the Mishnah is talking about where she under-received, where she sold it for too cheap, well then the reisha must not be talking about that. The Katani sefer that it says later on, that if her ksuba was 400 zuz, machra loza b'mona v'loza b'mona, that she sold, right? So her ksuba was 400 zuz, and she sold 100 zuz worth of property to one guy, another 100 zuz worth of property to another, a third 100 zuz property to another, and the last 100 zuz v'lachon yofim mona v'dinar b'mona. But to the last fellow, she sold 101 zuz's worth of property. Shel achrin michra batel. The last one, the sale does not work because she sold too much, right? She now in total sold 401 zuz, not 400. V'shel kulan michran kayim, but all the other three sales are fine. So we see that the Seifa is talking about where she sold 101 zuz for 100 zuz. So look, Reisha v'Seifa b'da ozil. No, both the Reisha and the Seifa are talking about where she sold the property for too little, where she sold too much property. V'Seifa hakamaj melon. And what the Seifa is telling us is time of the ozil b'diyasmi. That the reason why it's a problem is because who's losing out in the Seifa? It's the Yisomim, right? Because she's already sold all of her property that she was allowed to sell. Now she's overstepping what she's allowed to sell, and it's coming out of the Yisomin's chelik, right? The Yisomin's estate. So that's the problem. Hava bedida michra kayim. But if she oversells her own, it would be okay, right? Meaning, she right when she sells the first 100, so she still has another 300 to sell. When she sells the second 100, she still has another 200 to sell, right? We're saying that the last one is a problem because when she only has 100 left and she sells 101 worth of property, well, she's overstepping, right? It's no longer in what she's entitled to. It's now is a geschmack, a door slam, right? She's taking it out of the Yisomim. So Hami de Reisha Shmas Mina, but that we already know from the first part of the Mishnah. That if her ksuba was worth 200 zuzis, machra shveimone b'mosayim, and she sold property worth 100 zuz, she sold it for 200 zuzis. Oh, shveimosayim b'mone, or property worth 200 zuzis, she sold for only 100 zuz. Niskablu ksuba, so she received her ksuba. And over there, we're saying that it works because it's coming out of her own cheshbon. If she sold property worth 200 zuz, and she only sold it for 100 zuz, and now she loses it. She sold it for too cheap. So it's coming out of her cheshbon. We say that that's okay. I may have thought that Davka over there works because by selling a property worth 200 zuz for 100 zuz, she's now done. She's got nothing else that she can sell. So we say that that's okay. But over here, Nigzar mana rishin atu mana achrin kamashmalam. But in this case, I may have thought to say that even though the first thing that she sells, she still has more to sell. But since the last 100, if she oversteps her boundaries, it would not be okay. So I might think that even earlier ones would not be okay. So we're saying no, the earlier ones are okay. Just if the last 100 she oversells, then that would not be okay. Those who say, no. Okay, so so now yesterday in our Mishnah, we had asked about, yesterday on our daf, we had asked about what happens if a balabayas sends to a shliach, says to a shliach, right? A fellow says to a messenger, sell me half a kor's worth of property, and the fellow goes and sells a whole kor's worth of property. So we had discussed that yesterday. Now, those who say, that's not really the question you should be asking about if the instructions were to sell half a kor and he sold a whole kor. Our question yesterday of when a balabayas says to a shaliach, sell a half a kor, and a kor is a measure of property, right? Sell half a kor, and he sells a whole kor. Certainly, it's most of advarav. He's adding on to what the balabayas is saying, and it doesn't nullify what the balabayas says. It's adding on to it. But the kasha is the amrle zil zavenli kora ve'azu v'zavenli lischa. What happens if the balabayas says to the shliach, sell me a kor's worth of property, but he only sells half a kor's worth of property? What do we say? Do we say that the shaliach can say to the balabayas, look, you told me to sell a whole kor. I sold half a kor. I have your best interest in mind. It's better that way, because let's say I sold for you the whole kor, and then you decide, you know what, I don't need all this cash. You'd be stuck because you already sold it. Whereas what I did was I sold half the kor. Look, if you want more, I'll sell it. I'll sell to another person. I'll get you the whole kor. Or maybe the balabayas can say, Lo nichli delifshu shtare ilovai. He says, look, I don't need to be making deals with lots of different people and have all sorts of lots of different people with documents saying that 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 I sold them things. I want to deal with one buyer. I don't want to deal with lots of different buyers. So Amr B'Chanina Misura says, B'Chanina from Surah Tashma. If a balabayas gives to a shaliach a golden dinar is 6 selas. Ve'omar lo, and the balabayas says to the shaliach, Haveli choluk, here's a dinar, go and buy for me a garment. Ve'olach ve'vilo b'shalosh choluk u'v'shalosh talas. So he went and he bought a garment for half a dinar, as well as a cloak. So we see that in this case, he basically he did half the amount, right? Just like in the first case, when the balabayas says, here's this property is a kor, sell it, and the shaliach sells half of the kor. So here also the balabayas is saying to the shaliach, here's a dinar, basically, right, sell it, and in exchange for this dinar, buy a cloak, and instead, in exchange for the dinar, he gets buy a garment. Instead, he basically, for this dinar, he got half of he spent half of it on a garment. So shneim ma'alu, so both, right, and if this garment is hektish, so both the shaliach and the balabayas are over on me'ilah. So Yomar Bishlomo Shaliach Ki Agavna Osa Shlichuso Omosaf Advarav Have. So if we say that in this case, when the balabayas gives a dinar and says buy a garment, and he buys a garment, right? He basically transfers the dinar for half a garment, for half the value. So, and we're saying that both the balabayas and the shaliach are over on me'ilah, so that must mean that the shaliach is adding on to the instructions of the balabayas. He's not nullifying them. Mishum achi balabayas mal. That is why the balabayas is over on me'ilah as well. But if you say that the shaliach, by only purchasing a garment worth half of a dinar, if you say that he is nullifying what the balabayas is instructing him to do, well then amay ma'al, then why is the balabayas over on me'ilah? Well, you can say here what we're talking about, the Aisile Shav Sheish Bishalosh. Well, here you could say it's talking about where the garment that the shaliach purchased was actually a garment that was valued at a full dinar, right? It was a 50% off sale. So in this case, actually, it's not a situation where the Baal Habayis sent him with a dinar to buy a garment and he bought a garment worth half a dinar. No, he bought a garment worth a full dinar, but there was a 50% off sale, and therefore for half of the dinar he was actually able to get the value of a whole dinar. If that's the case, shaliach amay mo'al. Well, then what did the shaliach do? He didn't do anything wrong. The Baal Habayis told him, take this golden dinar and buy for me a garment, and I guess the dinar was hektish. I don't know if I said earlier that the garment was hektish. It must be that the dinar is hektish. And he did what the Baal Habayis told him to do. So if he does what the Baal Habayis told him to do, it's the Baal Habayis is over a me'ilah. So why is the shaliach over a me'ilah? Atalis. Well, because he also purchased a cloak with this dinar. If that is the case, Ema Seifa. But if we continue in that price, so what does it say? Rabbi Yehuda Omer says, Rabbi Yehuda, Af boze Baal Habayis lo mo'al, that actually the Baal Habayis here as well is not over a me'ilah, because he could say, I wanted you to buy a good gishmake garment, and you brought me a shvere, shvache, modna garment. And therefore it sounds like it's not talking about a situation where he found a mitzvah where for what would normally be worth 6 sellas, but a full dinar, there was 50% off, he was able to get it for half a dinar, but really it's the value of a full dinar. Can't be talking about that, because Rabbi Yehuda says that the Baal Habayis can say, you brought me a shver, shvache, modne garment, I don't want it. Doesn't sound like it's talking about he found the mitzvah. So my ra bedam. The Gemara says no. What it means is that it's not that the quality of the garment is bad. No, the quality of the garment is gishmak. He sent him to buy a garment worth a golden dinar, and sure enough, he bought him a garment worth a golden dinar. However, he bought it for 3 sellas, for half of a golden dinar. And what the Baal Habayis is saying is that you bought me this garment that is ra b'damim. You spent less than what I told you to spend. I told you to spend a full golden dinar, and you spent half of a golden dinar. Okay, so why is that a bad thing? Well, the Amalek, because the Baal Habayis says, "He isis li b'shis kol shekein da'ava shave ta'atesrei." Well, if for half a dinar you were able to get something worth a full dinar, well then, if you would have spent the full dinar, you would have been able to get something twice as good as that. And therefore, the Baal Habayis says, look, I sent you with a dinar to spend on a garment, spend the whole dinar. If it's 50% off, well then instead of just spending half the dinar and saying, oh great, I got for half a dinar what normally would cost a dinar, I would have preferred that you spend the entire dinar and get something that's normally unaffordable. Normally it would be worth 12 sellas or 2 golden dinars. So that's why he's upset. But in fact, it is talking about a situation. So where we say that he gives him a golden dinar, and he buys a garment for half. It is talking about where it was nonetheless worth. Right, it was a 50% off sale, and for half of a dinar, he got a garment that would normally be a full dinar. Dekadami, dekatoni. We can also see that Rabbi Yehuda is talking about. Right, when sort of a situation where you're able to get 50% off, right? Dikatani modu Rabbi Yehuda, it says Rabbi Yehuda agrees, admits, bekitnis sheshnei moalu, that if, however, it comes to something like legumes, so then both the Baal Habayis and the Shaliach are over a me'ilah. Sha'kidnis besela v'kidnis befruta. Right, that even though when it came to the garment, Rabbi Yehuda says, look, the Baal Habayis is off the hook because he says you got me the wrong thing. But when it comes to something like legumes, so then then both the Baal Habayis and the Shliach are over on Me'ilah, because basically there's no mitzias over here when it comes to legumes, right? When it came to the garment, he says, look, if for 3 selas you can get me something that normally would be 6 selas, well then, if you would have spent all 6 selas, then you could have gotten me something even twice as good as that, 12 selas, right? Meaning the more you spend, it gets exponentially better, right? The more you spend, the cheaper things get. But when it comes to legumes, you're not really getting any deals. 1 scoop of legumes is going to be 1 shekel. For 100 shekels, you get 100 scoops of legumes. You're not getting 1,000 scoops of legumes, right? So shmamina. So echidami. What does this mean? If it's a place where they sell lentils based on legumes based on evaluations, well then, the more you buy, the cheaper it will get. So the more you spend, the cheaper it gets. But but here it's talking about where it's a flat rate for each measure, and therefore, it's not like the Baal Habayis can say, if you would have gotten me more, we would have gotten a better deal. No, if you would have gotten more, we just would have received more. But you wouldn't have, the price wouldn't have gone down or anything like that. Okay, fine. What do you want me to tell you? So we don't necessarily have a proof to say that if a Baal Habayis sends a messenger to sell a core and he sells half a core, we don't have that case, because over here when he sent him with a dinar to buy a garment and he bought, half a garment, it's not talking about where he spent half of what he was supposed to spend. It's talking about where there was a 50% sale and he ended up actually getting the actual value of a full dinar for half of a dinar, but we don't know about what would happen in the case where he sold half of what he was meant to sell. Tashma, coming here. Also, like we learned earlier, if her Ksubis was worth 400 zuz, that she sold to the first guy for a mana, the second guy for a mana, the third guy for a mana, but to the last fellow, Yofimana Vidinar Bimano, she sold too much. She sold 101 zuzes for 100. Shal Achrin bottle, so the last one is bottle. Shakula Michron Kayim. But off the 3 of the first ones, it works. So what do we see? So we see, even though she was meant to sell 400 zuz, she sold the first thing she sold was 100 zuz. So here she kind of is being entrusted to sell 400 zuz, and she sells 100 zuz, and we say that's fine. Then she sells another 100 zuz, and that's fine. Another 100 zuz, and that's fine. The 4th one is a problem because she sells too much, but we see that even selling in smaller increments is fine. We say, well, it's like Rav Shisha Ber Davidi is going to say later on in the daf, it's talking about, where there wasn't one property that was worth 400 zuz. There were a few different properties, there were 4 different properties in 4 different areas, and each one was worth 100 zuz, or, the last one I guess was 101, and therefore, it's not shaykh to right? The assumption going into it was that the Yisomim know that she's going to be selling to 4 different people. But, if the mission was to sell 400 zuz and she sold 100 zuz, then that might be a different story. Pshita omer le'echad v'lo l'shnayim ha'omer le'echad v'lo l'shnayim. So now it's obvious that if the Baal Habayis says to the Shaliach, sell the property to 1 fellow and do not sell it to 2 fellows, well then he has to sell it to 1 fellow, he cannot sell it to 2 fellows, right? The Baal Habayis said, sell it to 1 fellow, not to 2. But what if the Baal Habayis says to the Shaliach, sell it to 1? He doesn't explicitly say, don't sell it to 2, but he says, sell it to 1. So Rav Huna Omar le'echad v'lo l'shnayim. So Rav Huna says, well, it means to 1 and not to 2. Rav Chizda v'Rabbi bar Rav Huna, whereas Rav Chizda and Rav Huna's son, Rabbi by Rav Huna, they both say that no, it means you could sell it to 1 person, you could sell it to 2 people, you could sell it to 100 people. What was that? Maybe it was a cat. Okay. Ikla Rav Nachman the Surah. So Rav Nachman visited Surah. Ul legabe Rav Chizda v'Rabbi bar Rav Huna. Rav Chizda and Rabbi bar Rav Huna came to Rav Nachman. Amruli, they said to him, Ki agavna mai. No, what's the halacha in a situation where a Baal Habayis says to the Shaliach, sell property to one fellow, but he doesn't explicitly say, and not to two. So Rav Nachman says, yeah, you can sell it to one person, you can sell it to two people, you can sell it to 100 people. They said to him, well, if that's the case, that if the shaliach can kind of, do whatever he wants, so what if he makes a mistake? If he makes a mistake, is that okay? So Rav Nachman says, look, no, if he makes a mistake and he sells too much or too little, that's a different story. They said to him, they said to Rav Nachman, don't you say that there's no ona'ah, that there's no concept of overpaying when it comes to property. So if that's the case, even if they sell too much, if the shaliach sells the property for too much or too little, who cares? So it shouldn't be a problem. So Nachman says, look, if the owner, if the balabayis makes a mistake and he sells it for too much or for too little, that's a different story. There's no onah over there. Shaliach, but if the messenger is the one who makes the mistake, the balabayis consider the messenger the sakune shdartich v'lo la'avosi. Look, I sent you to make my life easier, not to make my life harder. And therefore a mistake, would not be okay. The sale would not be okay. The Tanan, as we learn in a Mishnah, Omer l'shlucho, if a balabayis says to a shaliach, say utrom, go and separate, can you go to my field and separate truma? Torim kidas balabayis, so the shaliach separates truma based on what he understands that the balabayis would separate truma, right? Because truma is not a fixed amount, right? Meiser obviously is 1/10. Truma is not a fixed amount. We say that if a fellow is very generous, so he gives 1/40th. If he's very stingy, so he gives 1/60th, and the average is 1/50th. So, if the shaliach does not know what, how the balabayis separates truma, so just assume the middle path, 1/50th. Echad michamishim. Piches asare or hosif asare chumaso trume. And if the shaliach, messes up by 1/10 or either too much or too little, so it's still okay. But more than that, margin of error would not be okay. Vilu gabe balabais, when it comes to balabais himself, Tanya, we learn in a brayse, Torah ve'ola biyoda afilu echad me'esrim chumaso truma, even if it's 1/20th, which is a lot more than what we separate with, the generally separate, which is 1/50th. Even the balabais himself, even if it's 1/20th, then beseder, if he wants to separate a 20th, he separates a 20th. So we see that there's a difference between the balabayis who could separate even a 20th and the shaliach who, there's a margin of error up to, he separates beinonis, and there's a margin of error up to, a 1/10 above or a 1/10 below, but not more than that. So we see that there's differences between the balabayis and the shaliach. Okay? Fine. Tashmak Aminir, Isa Ksubasa Arba Meos Zuz. If her ksube was 400 zuz, machur loze b'mona v'loze b'mona, and she sells the 3 different fields each for a mona to 3 different people. V'lachun shvei mona v'dinar b'mona, and the last one was worth 101 zuzes, and she sells it for 100. Shel achron botol v'shel kulan michron kaim. So the last one doesn't work, but the other ones it does work. So now we had asked earlier, right, is it okay if he, right, what we had asked earlier, if a fellow, the balabai says to the shaliach, sell a core, and he sells half a core. So we had 2 ways of understanding it. One was that, look, it's okay, right, the shaliach is actually helping out the balabai, because he says, look, if I would have sold the whole thing, and you changed your mind, you would have been stuck. But then the other way to understand it is that to say, no, Taka, the balabais could say, I don't want to be dealing with 1 million different people having 1 million different stars. Now over here we seem to be saying though, that she could sell to this person and that person and a third person, right? And we don't seem to be concerned about too many stars. If she should be bikatine. So like we saw earlier there, if Shisha Davidi says, well, it's talking about where there were some smaller fields and she sold them to, and they were in different locations, and it was clear that there were going to have to be a number of different buyers. But, if it's all one field and one location, so then, I wouldn't necessarily know that they would be able to sell it to lots of different people. and make all of these different contracts. Well, friends, that was Daf Tzadi Tes of Masechta Ksubis. The bulk of the daf, we talked about what happens in a situation where a shaliach, Balabai sends a shaliach to sell a certain amount, and he sells half of that amount. Right? Do we say that the shaliach is actually doing something good because he's, that way because otherwise if he would have sold all of it and the Balabai changed his mind, he wouldn't be able to take it back. Or do you say, no, the Balabayas can say, look, I don't want to have contracts with so many people, just sell it to one person. And we haven't quite resolved that yet. We also saw a machlokes between Rav Huna and Rav Chizda, and Rav Huna on the one hand, and Rav Chizda and Rabbi by Rav Huna on the other hand, about if a fellow says sell to one person, but he doesn't specifically say, and don't sell to a second person. Rav Huna says it nonetheless means, and don't sell to a second person, whereas Rav Chizda and Rabbi by Rav Huna say it means to sell to one person, but even to 2 or even to 100. Friends, that was Daf Tzadi Tes of Masechta Ksubis. Hope you enjoyed. Peace out.